Hi, I'm Paper Will. Have you ever heard of Tale of Tales Game Studios? It was an independent video game developer that focused on experimental, artistic approaches to game design. That didn't really work out for them financially, but it did enable them to deliver some of the most thoughtful, expressive content gaming had ever seen, and The Path was their masterpiece. It was an exploration of 6 different sources of trauma in an adaptation of the Little Red Riding Hood fable. In The Path, you play as 6 girls, sisters, each sent to their grandmother's house one at a time. Every girl will start in front of the same long dirt path with forest on either side of you, and you're given a very simple directive. Go to grandmother's house and stay on the path. It's that simple. You could follow that advice, walk in a straight line for a few minutes, and arrive at grandmother's house. Do that with all 6 girls, and you finish the game in about 20 minutes. But you could go explore the forest, and there's a lot to see out there. Mysterious locations, beckoning voices, and dozens of items to collect are all waiting for you. The items don't actually do anything, but they give you insight into what the girl you're playing as is thinking. You'll also have frequent sightings of this enigmatic girl in a white dress who will guide you back to the path if you need help, but there are dangers in the woods as well. Keeping with the Little Red Riding Hood theme, there are wolves out there. Some of the wolves are literally wolves, and others are a bit more complicated and figurative. Each girl has a unique wolf, and if they encounter it, the girl will have to endure some sort of traumatic experience. Regardless of if you stayed on the path or if you explored the forest, you do eventually make it to grandmother's house. But if the girl you played encountered a wolf and suffered trauma, that influences how the girl perceives grandmother's house. Literally, it changes the interior to reflect that trauma. Clearly, there's a lot happening here under the surface. Strong color motifs, literary references, religious symbolism, and we'll get into all of that a bit later, but for now, just keep in mind not everything you see in this game is to be taken at face value. The path is all about finding subtext. In this video, we're going to examine the 3 different elements of each sister: who they are, their wolf encounter, and how their worldview has been changed or warped due to their trauma. So let's get started with the first and youngest sister, Robin. Through her interaction with objects in the forest, we can tell that she's excitable, playful, and above all else, carefree. But we also learn that she's deeply detached from the concepts of danger and mortality. I mean, she's 9 years old, of course she is, but Robin is aware of death. She just sees it as this very impermanent concept. At one point, she talks about how we bury the dead so they'll grow back again, and when she finds the corpse of a bird, her first reaction was rejecting her connection to it. Appropriately, she finds her wolf in the cemetery location. Robin's wolf is an actual wolf, although it won't attack you if you just leave it alone. In fact, it tries to ignore you, but Robin sees the wolf not as a source of potential danger, but a potential playmate. She forcefully climbs on top of it, hoping to have some fun, but the wolf struggles. It violently shakes her off, and it terrifies Robin as things fade to black. After her experience, Robin appears back on the path. This is going to be a repeating pattern with the 6 girls, by the way. After their traumatic experiences, the girls always appear back on the road, but the world is going to be devoid of color. As for Robin, she's been traumatized by her experience with the wolf because while she understood that death existed, she didn't quite grasp how it was a real possibility for her. But as she enters grandmother's house, we can see that now the idea of death is consuming her. She's terrified of things like birthdays, of aging, and her own mortality. All the doors have these deep claw marks and blood splatters, and Robin's time in the house ends with her falling into an open grave. Yes, learning about dying is necessary as we grow up because death is a part of life, but Robin's not just afraid of dying. Now she's afraid of living. That's not a healthy way to approach or understand mortality. This was about 4 years ago. I was in this jazz bar a few blocks from my apartment. I didn't really like jazz, but I liked being around people who like jazz. I guess I was kind of a poser. And I'm at the bar drinking a pina colada. Don't judge me. And that's when I saw them for the first time. This person a few bar stools down from me, and I don't believe in love at first sight, but there was definitely a spark or a flicker or something. So I chugged my pina, I went up, and I asked if I could join them, and they said yes. I said, "Hi, I'm Will." They told me their name, but today we'll just call them Jody. The second sister we play as is Rose. Rose is still quite young, but she's a bit more mature than Robin. Rose loves nature, and she has this very deep sense of spirituality about the world. Her thoughts often focus on things like the balance of the inner and the outer. She loves playing with animals, and as she wanders the forest, her mind often fixates on the idea of souls and floating away. She's thoughtful and she's caring, but in some ways she's so focused on the spiritual that she's become detached from the reality in front of her. You'll find Rose's wolf at a foggy lake deep in the forest. Rose's wolf is this transparent figure hovering above the center of the lake, and Rose hurriedly takes a rowboat out to greet it. Her wolf pulls up to her and lets her float above the water with him to fly together briefly, and during this encounter, it certainly looks like she's having a spiritual experience as the screen fades to black. But as Rose wakes up back on the path, she seems worse for wear and depressed. Inside Grandmother's house, it's, well, raining, and nearly every image Rose sees connects to the idea of moving water and faucets and drains. Her final room is this spinning water vortex of things in her life being swirled around and sucked down to the bottom as she's picked up by that same current. Rose is no longer concerned with floating, but with sinking and drowning. We can deduce that Rose was likely almost drowned out on that lake. Her floating wolf wasn't real, like Robin's wolf probably was. It was just Rose seeing what she wanted to see, a spiritual interaction. Rose's wolf represented her unquestioning trust in her own faith, and the dissonance between that faith and the reality of almost drowning, well, it sinks her. As we get older, it's good to develop doubts about what we've been taught. That's just critical thinking. And it doesn't mean that what we were taught was necessarily even wrong. It's just dangerous to believe anything without ever examining it. Faith without doubt isn't really faith. It's just the inertia of belief. Rose is traumatized because she nearly died after entrusting everything to her spirituality. But instead of floating away to the clouds, she just tricked herself into seeing an angel, rode out into a lake, fell out of a boat, and almost died. So now she doesn't believe in anything. Jody and I spent the whole night together in that bar, just laughing and enjoying, talking about hell, if I know, and everything, nothing. I do remember us arguing about which cereal had the sexiest name. Frosted Flakes was my answer. Jody's answer was Honey Smacks, which is a pretty good answer. And you know, we were in that little bar until 4 o'clock in the morning, but neither of us wanted to go home, so after we left, we took a walk, and it's cheesy, but we took a walk and we watched the sunrise. And although I knew it was way too fast, we started dating that day. The third sister we play is Ginger, and Ginger's one of my favorite characters in the game. She's adventurous and mischievous, very devil-may-care. She runs barefoot through the woods, and she wears a blue peacock feather in her hair. Peacocks as a symbol mean different things to different cultures, but in traditional Celtic culture, they often represent liberty and birth. Ginger enjoys climbing trees, pretending she's a pirate. She's not interested in boys or makeup or stuff like that. She just wants to have escapades and quests. When Rose found this discarded bullet in the forest, her first thought was, one less bullet means one less death, but Ginger, her first thought was, I bet I can make this explode. She wants an untethered, open life where she can make up the rules of the world as she goes, and she often talks about her body and how it gives her advantages over others. An eye that can see further, a small body that lets her run faster. Ginger finds her wolf in a field of roses, with a scarecrow surrounded by red butterflies. Her wolf is a young girl in a red dress, and the girl surprises Ginger from behind. Then they begin to run around the field together, only for Ginger to fall as the screen fades to black, as pleasant music plays. It doesn't seem like a very traumatic moment, does it? But as Ginger wakes up on the path, she's clearly upset. In Grandmother's house, there's hair growing all over the walls, a lot of prison imagery, and a dirtied red bed. Toy soldiers, which people would guess are played more by with boys than girls, but is something Ginger would obviously like, are pushed under that red bed, and her final room is a padded cell room with peacock feathers falling. Ginger's wolf, the girl in the red dress, well, it could actually be one of a few different things, but I think the most likely interpretation is that it was Rose's womanhood blooming. It's, her period and puberty. There's hair growing everywhere, bloody mattresses, flashes of shame and puddles, butterflies that look a little bit like ovaries to me, plucked peacock feathers, which, like I said, represent freedom, and births. Ginger sees her period and puberty as imprisonment, the loss of freedom, and it deeply disturbs her. Her mind is focused on wings being plucked and jail cells made of bloody mattresses. Ginger's trauma comes from feeling locked into a body that she thinks is betraying her. A body that she used to be quite proud of is now a prison cell. Ginger getting her period isn't a bad thing. It's an important step towards adulthood, but for her personality of liberty, well, it's clashing with her body's decision to change her without her input. There's also a surprisingly compelling transgender interpretation that Ginger is actually a transgender boy struggling to come to terms with their identity, and there's certainly some elements of gender roles being poked at. Ginger seems to be more interested in what society thinks guys are interested in, toy soldiers and dinosaurs and the color blue. The distress of being trapped in a body that feels wrong to you is certainly a familiar concept to many, but not all transgender individuals. And we can also see a lot of phallic imagery in Ginger's final flash of consciousness, which maybe I'm stretching, but seems very reminiscent of gender reassignment surgery, although I can't show it to you because it is really graphic. The period wolf theory and the transgender identity wolf theory aren't even mutually exclusive interpretations either. You could definitely see that these ideas could work together, but at the end of the day, the important thing to take away is that Ginger is disturbed by the way her own body is changing, and that's not good for anyone to feel. Cis, trans, straight, queer, asexual, hating your physical self obviously isn't a healthy approach to your changing and maturing body. After only a few months, Jody decided we should move in together, and things were good. But we were busy. I was bartending most nights, and Jody was an artist. And they made pretty good money doing it, comfortable money, just following their creative whims. They sold several paintings for good money. They had multiple photographs published in national magazines. They modeled, they did these incredible installation pieces, and everything Jody touched turned into art. And they had to own that art in a lot of ways. They had that one in a million artistic streak that let them break the rules of our medium before ever learning them. The fourth sister we play is Ruby, who feels very stuck between childhood and adulthood. She's too old for toys and make-believe, but she isn't really interested in dating or makeup yet. And if you take her dialogue at face value, you'd think she prefers being alone. She'll think things like, "Don't come close to me if you want something from me, just leave me alone," and "I wish I had a scarecrow to keep the idiots away." You may have also noticed that she has a leg brace on, but we'll get into that in a second. Ruby finds her wolf in a rusted playground area, which seems to represent her fading childhood, and her wolf is a young-looking guy dragging a rolled-up carpet, possibly with a body wrapped up inside. But despite awareness that this person was clearly dangerous, despite emphasizing this whole time that all she wants to do is be left alone, she immediately takes a seat next to him. When he offers her a cigarette, it's clear she doesn't want to smoke, but she takes one anyway. The truth is, if you read between the lines, it's clear that Ruby is desperately lonely for connections. Despite wearing a leg brace for some injury or condition, which should slow her down, her running speed towards her wolf encounter is much faster than the other sisters. She'll exert herself, risk injury, just to be a part of something with someone. And as they sit down and smoke in silence, we can hear the sound of a car engine getting louder and louder as the screen fades to black. After appearing back on the path, Ruby's leg is bent at a weird, twisted angle, which looks like a car crash victim's pose. There are smoky hallways in Grandmother's house, a school gymnasium with a burning car wreck, metallic engine architecture everywhere, and as soon as she appears in her final room, the whole house shakes furiously like it's crashing. Ruby sees flashes of her own body, mangled and crimson and broken. Ruby lived her life telling everyone, including herself, a lie, that she was fine alone, that she doesn't need anybody, but at the very first chance she got, despite it being with an obviously malicious person, despite it being through an activity she was uncomfortable with, Ruby tried to form a connection, and it nearly gets her killed in a car crash or some other risky action. Ruby's trauma is having her previous insecurities and loneliness reinforced with cold-rolled steel regret. Now she's lonelier than ever and even less likely to try to reach out to people who potentially could have been supportive and caring for her instead of abusive or forceful. Like any great artist, Jody sometimes had these creative ruts where the talent, it just wouldn't flow for a few days. And it was really stressful for them in a way most people wouldn't understand. And Jody needed an outlet, a way to direct that energy into something. So occasionally they would strike out at what was close, and I was close. But it wasn't like a big deal or anything. I mean, sometimes those creative ruts were really rough, and Jody might do or say something that they didn't really mean to do or say. And that's part of a relationship. And they'd apologize so sincerely afterwards. And Jody would say, "I'm sorry about last night, and that's not really who I am. And Will, I'm trying to improve, and I need your help. I need you to accept my flaws." I was happy to. I mean, that's what you're supposed to do, right? The fifth sister we play as is Carmen. Carmen is 17, and she's at a point in her life where she's starting to explore her sexuality, or more accurately, the attention sexuality can bring. And she plays with it, wearing tight clothes, high heels, and even her idol poses are a bit more suggestive than the other girls. And hey, developing your sexuality is another important step in the process of maturing, but Carmen is approaching everything with this very dangerously immature mindset about the attention she gets. For example, when she visits the lake, her first thought is, I wish I could go for a swim, and maybe a handsome forester would watch me. Wanting to feel attractive? Well, most of us can relate to that, but Carmen doesn't seem informed or prepared for the objectification that sexual attention can often bring. Carmen's wolf is a middle-aged lumberjack living out at the campsite location. There are a couple of tents, a bonfire, trees marked for cutting with big red X's, and a shed. Oh, and hey, the girl in the white dress, didn't forget about her, did you? She has her own cute little tent as well. That's kind of adorable. At first, the lumberjack pays no attention to Carmen. He's busy cutting down trees, but being ignored bothers her, and she interrupts him, grabbing his hat and encouraging him to chase her. After the two sit down at the fire, he offers her a drink of moonshine as things fade to black. What happens between the campfire scene and Carmen waking up near the path is left a little bit ambiguous, but as Carmen enters grandmother's house, well, that ambiguity is pretty short-lived. We can hear the sound of wood being sawed as a woman moans loudly. Nothing but logs and trunks and red crosses on targets. Again, a lot of phallic symbolism here, and it's not thinly veiled. It's clear Carmen and the lumberjack had sex. Okay, so we're getting into some tricky waters here, because whether or not that sex was rape, well, it's a major point of discussion among players of this game. Some players argue that no, it wasn't rape, not even statutory rape. Carmen's 17, and in many states in the US as well as the country this game was developed in, legally that puts her at or above the age of consent. And yes, Tale of Tales went to great lengths to show that Carmen initiated all contact with the lumberjack. In grandmother's house, we don't see any direct evidence that the encounter was forced, just that it was unpleasant at times. Those players say that Carmen wasn't traumatized from forced sex, but from the realization that she as a person had meant almost nothing to the lumberjack. She was an object, another red-marked tree to cut down. And honestly, this interpretation has some good points. Carmen certainly feels like she was objectified, and that's a big element of her trauma. But the truth is, I think this argument is a little bit disingenuous because it ignores the vast majority of evidence that points to say, yes, this was rape. No, not statutory rape, but forced penetration. Carmen never once mentions actually wanting to have physical relations with anyone. Sure, she talks about desire, but always in the context of attention, not sex yet. And even if it's not statutory rape, the lumberjack is old enough to be her father, yet he offers a minor an alcoholic drink. Plus, as she travels through grandmother's house, things are really hazy and murky and difficult to see, implying Carmen may not have had full control of her mental faculties. Honestly, any doubt I had about the nature of their encounter was wiped as soon as I got to the final room. It has this massive tree trunk violently stabbing through the bed, breaking through the mattress, the bed frame, and even the ground under the bed. It's literally forcing its way through barriers. That's pretty clear to me. Carmen's trauma is a mixture of being objectified, some feelings of shame, and being a victim of one of the worst crimes you can commit against someone. And if I can step on a soapbox for a second here, whatever shape your sexuality takes, exploring it, if you want to, is fantastic. Don't misinterpret this game's message to be, interest in sex is bad and it's the victim's fault. That is not what's happening here. But it's also critical to learn that attention can be a danger to you because there are people out there that won't respect the boundaries you set, so you do need to keep an eye out for them. But after a while, Jody stopped apologizing for what they did to me. They just say, yeah, you really should forgive me, Will. I mean, even if I don't apologize. And isn't that what love is? Acceptance of all the flaws? And if we're being honest, you deserved it, Will. It's pretty fucking selfish of you to want me to be perfect, Will. It's selfish of you when you cry when I hit you, Will. You're supposed to be a man, aren't you? You're supposed to be tough. You're crying over some bruises? Will, you're crying over some stitches? Will, it's your fault I hit you. It's your fault I lose my temper. It's your fault. I read your phone text, Will. You almost told somebody what I did to you last week, didn't you? If you ever do tell somebody, I'll kill myself, Will, or I'll kill you, and that'll be your fault too. So, get it together. That's how things were for the 15 months I spent with Jody, and It felt like I couldn't breathe at all for a whole year until the last night that I ever saw Jody. Alright, we've gotten to the sixth and final sister, Scarlet. As the oldest of the siblings, her role in the family is very parental. While her younger sisters are traversing their youth, for better or for worse, Scarlet's not really afforded that freedom. She's too busy handling responsibilities. Because of that, everything in Scarlet's mind is filtered through these feelings of order and dependability. She mentions how it's so vital that everyone wear a mask to cover who they really are, how things are better for everyone if you hide your true self. But behind that adult mask, Scarlet's easily one of the most creative and expressive people in this game. She waxes poetic as she travels, talks about musical renditions, and when she has the time, loves playing the piano. That thick mask of sternness is Scarlet covering an unbelievably artistic soul, and the gap between those identities is causing Scarlet a lot of internal pain. So it's fitting that her wolf is waiting at an abandoned, broken down stage in the middle of the woods, which was also one of the most difficult locations for me to find in the entire game. Scarlet's wolf is an older man or woman, it's unclear, with long white hair and these stark green armbands. If you've been paying attention, you've probably noticed that the path plays a lot with color motifs, red and black mostly, so these green bands, they kind of stick out to you. As Scarlet approaches the stage's piano, her wolf will approach her and seemingly give advice or criticism over her shoulder as the sound of intense metallic cutting or sharpening can be heard. As the scene fades and Scarlet appears back on the path, she enters grandmother's house. We see white sheets on furniture and the lights are out as though the whole house had been abandoned. Long, perfect rows of empty milk jars line the floors. We see flashes of wire pulling at Scarlet's eyes and mouth and body, and of course a caged bird. Things end as you enter a room with rising green curtains and spotlights and what kind of looks like a cradle, but it's hard to make out. So, who was Scarlet's wolf? Well, I have a few different ideas. The first is that it was Scarlet's music instructor, maybe somebody who pushed her too far or shredded her dreams with big sharp claws of criticism, and that's certainly possible. I took violin for a few years in high school, and my teacher was a little strict, and hearing them come up behind me to tell me I was doing something wrong was often terrifying. But I don't know about this theory. It feels a little bit shallow. The second idea that I had was that Scarlet is traumatized after having an abortion, and she's pushing feelings of guilt or covering them with a mask. First, there's a lot of imagery about wires pulling at skin and tearing flesh and blood, which might represent a back alley abortion. We also had those long lines of empty milk jars, as though there was supposed to be milk for them that never came, and a lot of preparation was done. There's also a small urn on a table she passes, and here's a bit of a curveball. According to Germanic folklore, fairies would often come into the human world for a mate to have children with. The piano song being played during the wolf encounter is titled The Fae. Fae being both a classic English term for the feelings of death, as well as an archaic French term for the word of fairy. The wolf had those green bands as well, a color deeply associated with the fairy lore, and the game is very deliberate with color choices. I'm not 100% convinced by this idea either, but there is some evidence to support it. But to me, the most likely interpretation is that Scarlet's wolf represents her feelings of jealousy over the other girls and guilt about wanting to abandon her family. Her younger sisters get to pursue their interest, to play, to ride boats, to be a warrior in a tree, to encounter other people in social settings, to live untied lives, but Scarlet doesn't get to do any of those things. In the character select screen, as the other sisters are doing whatever they want to do, Scarlet's on the phone calling someone about bills or house payments or something. She has to be serious and strict and orderly or the family will fall apart, but in truth, she wants to cut ties with everything and reconnect with the artist inside of her, and all of that is causing an incredible amount of guilt for her. Scarlet's trauma on the surface is quite muted and subtle, kind of like her personality is, and it's very easy to misinterpret, but not all traumatic experiences are quick and sudden and traceable to individual events. Long-term intense stress can produce the exact same levels of mental suffering, and that's what we're seeing with Scarlet. Jody had been working on a painting, and they couldn't get the colors just right. They were yelling and screaming, and I told them just to please calm down, and Jody didn't like that. Jody grabbed a box cutter and came at me. I ran into the bathroom. I locked the door behind me. They were pounding on it for a few seconds, but then they went back to painting, and an hour later they came out and said they were sorry, which didn't happen very often, and that they were going to going to get me my favorite meal from my favorite restaurant, so just wait about an hour. I waited a few minutes. I grabbed some stuff. I put it in a suitcase and I took off. I wish I could tell you I took off because I had come to my senses, and after that terrible night, I was leaving Jody because I deserve better, but the truth is I was just really scared. But it was nighttime, and I didn't have any money, so I just walked, and after a while I ended up in a park, and I sat down on a bench, and I spent the night there. You know, if the path had just shown 6 girls getting traumatized, the end credits roll, it wouldn't be a very good game, would it? Commentary on trauma is worthless without showing some recovery. In what's labeled the epilogue, we play as the girl in the white dress. Despite putting her in a ton of the footage for this video, I intentionally chose not to bring too much attention to her. I kind of wanted you to notice her on your own, because that's how she appears in the game, always off in the background. The truth is, she actually appears nearly every time there's a major event in the game, near every wolf, every forest location, and every object. So who is she, and why are we playing as her in the epilogue? Well, I don't think there's an easy way to describe exactly what she represents, but in general, I see her standing for the balance between negative and maturing life experiences versus negative and purely traumatic life experiences. Bad events in life that teach us something versus events that just exist to hurt us. See, the girl in the white dress always appears near the wolves and even tries to point them out to us and say, hey, look, you do need to see this wolf because your attitude about death or spirituality or puberty or acceptance or sexuality or life, they're not fully developed yet. So look at that wolf over there and learn from it, but don't get too close. Because after observing the wolves, she'll guide you back to the path without having to encounter them. She's looking at potential traumatic experiences, curbing you away from them while also using them as teachable moments. That's the best way to mature and learn, to understand dangers and threats in life without becoming scarred by them. But the girl in the white dress, well, she also understands that scars are probably going to be made and trauma may happen to anyone. So she addresses that too. Playing the girl in the white dress, you're not going to run into any wolves, but the only thing you have to do is go to grandmother's house. A friend of mine who worked in the same bar called me up and asked me why I had skipped work, and I said I was sick or something. And they asked me again, is everything okay? And sitting there on that bench, I started going through my list of standard rehearsed, I'm fine, everything's great. Why would you ask us a question? Monologue that I had gotten down so well. But as I tried to get to those lines, my friend asked, are you really okay? And I just couldn't anymore. I told them everything. And they drove up and they picked me up from the park and they let me stay with them for as long as I needed to get my life back together again. And thanks to that friend and hard work and never replying to Jody's text and a few months of therapy, it felt like I could breathe again. Literally, it felt like I could breathe again for the first time after 15 months. I started enjoying life again, including my hobbies, hiking. I hike now, playing the guitar, being a massive poser at jazz bars, and making videos. And things are great. In grandmother's house, we can visit all of the previous traumatic moments of each of the sisters' lives, reminding us that negative experiences will always be there, a part of us, but at the very end, after walking the winding rooms of mortality, disillusionment, body shame, fatalism, assault, and regret, this time we get to the grandmother. After we went through hell, we survived. We sometimes got help, and we worked hard to get to a good place. And the wolf is there, and it's always going to be there in some form. But this time, it's stuffed. A reminder of how strong we are, or a reminder of how fortunate it is to have someone help us when we need help. If you're in a bad place, as hard as it is, and I know it's hard, reach out to someone, a friend, a family member, a person or a teacher you like, even a support hotline. Please, you can find a link to a few different support groups in the description. And if you're in a good place, keep an eye out for people who might need help. It's hard for them in a lot of ways to reach out, and it's like it's like standing on a boat and saying, anybody who's drowning, just raise your hands and we'll find you and we'll send you a lifesaver. Like, it's, people don't work that way, you know. They're trying to stay afloat. They don't have time to wait while you notice their fingers. And I was very fortunate that somebody noticed. Sorry, I didn't mean to go preach at anybody. I guess I'm just saying, you know, watch out for everybody. Let's tackle mental health from two fronts. As always, thanks for watching this video. I hope you have a good week. Stay safe, and bye.